Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing today? Uh, Unfortunately, we are in the midst of the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and 6 months have passed since this conflict began, and now we have entered the seventh month, and on 7th of May. Uh, 7 months will be completed since the conflict started. And so far, we have not found any solution to this conflict. More than 30,000, in fact, about 34,000 people have been killed, according to the statistics by the Gaza Health Ministry. So, the concern here is that the media uh, is unfortunately not playing the proper role it should play, and media is not reporting the news, the facts as it should. For example, media is reporting biased information, and the media institutions, the journalists are linking unrelated events to this movement for this pro-Palestine movement. So now we will analyze how the media is handling the affairs, and how the media is presenting news, how media is linking events related to this Gaza genocide. And my guest today is Mr. Jon V. Kofas. So let's proceed to Mr. Kofas. How are you, sir?
Good evening, Assad. Good evening,
Good
everyone.
evening.
I'm very good. Thank you. Indeed, a tragedy that the media more and more investigative journalistic pieces are coming out. How some of the largest news organizations in the Western world are in fact manufacturing the news and editing to the degree that it manipulates the story so that it reflects the official position of Western governments and of Israel. The latest was a very good article in the American-based news organization, independent news organization, called The Intercept. And according to The Intercept, the New York Times, which is no stranger to controversy when it comes historically to how it covers the Middle East, heavily biased for decades in favor of Israel, and giving minimal coverage to the Arab side, and specifically to the Palestinian side. This news story basically revealed that the management, through the editorial staff, directed writers not to use certain terms like genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing. This is heavy-handed censorship. And then another news piece revealed, again, the same paper, that apparently the word Palestine was not supposed to be used. So what we have here, and this is very, very important in terms of the Western media claiming to provide full disclosure to the readers and the viewers, when in fact full disclosure is not what is practiced. And it's not about the New York Times, it's the Western media, period, at large, whether it's television, the print media, the online. What we have is news reporting and news analysis which reflects the official position of government and the question, and of course, the government's supporting Israel. And the question, of course, is toward what end? News organizations, of course, are a business. They are owned by investors. Invariably, the investors make money two ways. They sell advertising to other businesses, and they make money by having readers. So the reader and the advertiser are actually interconnected there. And the news organization is theoretically, at least this is what they claim, theoretically supposed to be following the principles of freedom of the press, democratic principles, bringing up in the news stories not one side's position, but all sides, both sides. If there are two sides in the story, both sides. This has obviously not been happening, but worse than that, unfortunately, what we have seen is some extreme examples of manipulation of stories. One of the worst ones, a lot of people who we have followed in the last 7 months or so, the genocide in Gaza, know the story about the so-called rape on October 7th, 2023, by Hamas, and how leading papers and leading individuals, analysts and so forth, including some women's rights activists, were involved in this, arguing, yes, we have to do something about these men violating the rights of women, when in fact, we now know that that was a planted story, a manufactured story. So we have come to the degree of manufacturing the news exactly as a number of scholars, including Noam Chomsky, have argued years ago that the news media does. And of course, this is a very serious situation because, as you point out, more than 34,000 people have died. But I do want to address one other issue about the manipulation of the news, which one would think that the media itself would try to protect its own. When we look at statistics, as of a couple of days ago, 97 journalists have been killed in Israel and 4 missing, 16 injured, 25 arrested, and countless others harassed, as well as their families, they themselves and their families. And what we have is international advocacy groups like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, those organizations that protect and look after the rights of journalists. There are also NGOs that oversee these groups. And what we have is, of course, the Western media as a whole, institutionally, not raising a voice. So here's the question I would like to pose. What if the exact same thing were happening on the part of Russia or China? And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the Western media constantly argues that they are not like the one-party state China or the oligarchic Russia of Vladimir Putin, which where the state has a major role in influencing the way the news is covered. For example, in Russia, the news organization TASS reflects the position of the Kremlin, In China, various news organizations, including Asia Times, for example, reflects the position of Beijing. They argue, well, you see, they're just the mouthpieces. But then when you read stories in The Intercept that the New York Times is not doing much anything much different than what those people are accused of doing by the very Western media that claims to be above all of that, that claims to be objective, which of course is obviously it's lofty talk, but it's not. It's nice talk, but it's vacuous. There's nothing there. Beyond that, there is. I want to broaden this out and point to something that's very serious here now that this has been going on for 7 months. I think people all over the world, and we know that the vast majority of the world is on the side of the Palestinians. Out of 193 countries, 140 have recognized Palestine. Just recently, unfortunately, the United States, which openly and publicly states that it wants a two-state solution, just recently, a couple of days ago, I read the story, has been lobbying. Story has yet to be verified, but there is a news story that the U.S. has been lobbying for UN member nations in the General Assembly not to vote for the Palestinian inclusion in the General Assembly, which is, of course, something that's coming up. The United States, claiming to be the country, the beacon of democracy in the world, and that's where you have a great deal of manipulation, as Seymour Hersh, one of the great investigative reporters in the United States, who exposed a lot of the conspiracies with regard to the Ukrainian war, including the Nord Stream 2 blowing up of the pipeline delivering gas to Northwest Europe and Germany. So what we have here is, and I want to explain this very clearly because, like I said, we're in this 7 months now. We have clearly a coordination, unspoken. This doesn't mean that there's a conspiracy. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, by the way. But we definitely have consensus on the part of government, media, and the corporate world. And one of the things that has happened in the last 7 months, Assad, as we look back at this thing and how the media, the Western media has covered it, is that there is all the focus is on government, or 90% of the focus is on government. Because government sends military aid, Germany sends military aid, the UK sends military aid, the United States. Fine, that's true. However, Israel would not have been able to carry on this genocide were it not for the two other pillars in the tripod, and that is corporate, the Western corporate world, and the media. They are very, very important. And this brings me to journalists who jump at the opportunity even when they have no evidence, but their organizations permit them to do this, and jump at the opportunity at everything that happens. Is the Australian, for example, situation, the unfortunate individual who was mentally ill, and he went after several people, killed 5 women and 1 Pakistani security guard. And what happened is the story broke, and obviously the police investigated, and they found out it was indeed someone who had psychological problems. And yet there were those who came forward and said, well, this is Islamic terrorism. And with social media, of course, it's very easy to disseminate this, to spread this news out very fast, because social media, especially, um, is not filtered. They do censor what they don't like. The organizations do censor what they don't like, but the Islamophobia aspect is not is rarely censored. And what you have here is people who promote, and they should know better. They should know better. Self-restraint in journalism is very important. Verification of sources is very important. A sense of responsibility. And in my view, it's not so much the fault of the individual, because of the individual reporter or writer, as much as it is the organization behind them, because all individuals work for organizations. And these organizations are, in fact, have a line, a policy to pursue. And that policy is in line with government policy and corporate policy. So, as I said, the tripod, this three-pronged pillar is media, corporate world, and government. And then you have an individual who figures they have nothing to lose. You never, what are they going to do to them? Promoting, stretching the truth, promoting something that's not even remotely correct. And this is, unfortunately, the truth has fallen victim to this genocide. I remember when when Israel went after Gaza and started bombing Gaza, and the very first hospital that they hit, there were all sorts of people. When I wrote on this very briefly that this is a war crime. This should not be happening in our time. Bombing hospitals with patients in it, and doctors, and babies, and women, and so forth. And immediately, there were all sorts of accounts, starting in Tel Aviv and then spreading throughout the Western world, that the story, that the IDF had nothing to do with it, that the Israeli Defense Force had nothing to do with it, the Israeli Air Force had nothing to do with it. It was the Palestinians. The Palestinians did it, and they tried to cover it up. And then, unfortunately, what you see, and my God, there have been so many of these. This is all on video now. You see State Department, White House representatives, and European press representatives go on the air and try to echo the line of Tel Aviv. Now, do they know that what they're saying is not true? Do they know and not care? Do they know and figure, well, this is the line we're going to pick and see who believes it? Eventually, Israel made no bones about the fact it did not try to conceal that, yes, we're hitting ambulances, doctors, hospitals, everything. Refugee camps, everything inside. Nothing is sacred. United Nations, humanitarian aid workers, nothing is off limits. And so what we had was a complete admission eventually, when in fact initially when this first started, it was total denial. And the Western media and business leaders, institutional leaders, and politicians said, yes, Israel is right. They're lying. The other side is lying, namely the Palestinians and their supporters. This thing is, to me, I haven't lived through World War II to see what was happening. But to me, this is just unprecedented. I was very young during Vietnam War, and there were a lot of, my God, there are lies during that war. And in every war, they're bound to be, there's obviously war means propaganda. War necessarily, one has to be naive and expect the press not to take sides. Press takes sides, especially during war. Okay, and nationalism becomes heightened during war. People become nationalistic. Journalists are human beings; they take sides. But to lay out claims of objectivity and journalistic ethics, which are never followed, on the contrary, they violate their very own principles. This is an outrage, especially since these very same institutions of the West, media institutions of the West, preach it to the rest of the world and try to tell the rest of the world that they should be the model for journalism on this planet, and this is where it becomes problematic. This is where the rest of the world now in 2023, 2024, the rest of the world looks at this finally, especially the global South, and they figure, okay, this is enough of this, enough of the hypocrisy. So the global South, which, by the way, is the vast majority of the world's population, of the 8 billion people, that's the vast majority of the population, they have finally seen the mask is off. And the media has helped to shatter the credibility of itself and of their governments and their government's policies, because they say one thing and do the other. In this latest episode with Iran hitting Israel in a retaliation for Israel bombing the embassy compound in Damascus, Syria, the United States were staying out of it. Well, it turns out there are now stories that they didn't stay out, and the media went along with it. So what we have here is a serious credibility issue, and credibility is very important. It's the selling point of a news organization. If if you're going to sell them nonsense, they might as well read those tabloid journalistic things, which are not journalism at all. They're tabloid gossip columns that are about aliens invading Earth and causing chaos down here on Earth. So this is a very very serious issue, and it has undermined the credibility of the West. I think that what we have here is a situation where the genocide in Israel, which, by the way, the New York Times, according to The Intercept, this is not the article, people can go to The Intercept and look it up. According to The Intercept, the New York Times directed the staff not to use the term genocide or apartheid or ethnic cleansing. Okay, so this is where we're at. And this is supposed to be freedom of the press. Where is the freedom? How is this any different than what the Kremlin or Beijing are doing? I fail to see the difference. There is greater coordination in the Kremlin and Beijing, because in the case of the Western organizations, news organizations, remember there's a tripod. They serve both government and the corporate world, whereas they have greater, the state has much greater control and directs. But honestly, the war in Israel, this genocide campaign, has exposed this hypocrisy and completely discredited the lofty claims of these organizations. And one of the things that students, undergraduates, and then graduates as well, learn in schools of journalism is that you must verify the story. You must have incontrovertible evidence. You can't go with the story either orally or in writing. You can't go with the story unless you have verification. You can't make up stuff. In other words, it's just very simple. You can't manufacture stories. That's fiction. That's what people like me do. I write fiction, but that's when you're in the business of journalism, you're supposed to be reporting whatever actually took place, not make up stuff because you have ideological, political, ethnic, cultural, religious biases against someone, and you're trying to fit the story into the mold of ideology, politics, culture, and religion. That's not journalism. This is exactly what the West accuses the non-Western world, especially countries like this, I pointed out Russia and China, because the West is, that's the nemesis of the West. That's the enemy, the big enemy. Those are the big enemies. Well, they never bothered to look in the mirror. And here's, I'll tell you my angle on the story of the British journalists is I was wondering why it is that the news organizations permit this. And here's the thing, that a journalist, whether in Germany, because Germany, by the way, has been very controversial in suppressing anything that's pro-Palestinian, very controversial. Whether in Germany or in the United States or in the UK, journalists know which way, as they say in America, which way the wind is blowing. They know that if they publish pro-Israel stories, even if they don't have they haven't checked their sources, they don't have the incontrovertible evidence, that they can't go wrong, because the news organization's policy is in line with the government and the corporate world. So they go with the story. And one other thing, by the way, I'll tell you, because I knew a couple of journalists in the US, and I know 3 of them here. And, journalists, by the way, are not, they're savvy people. They don't have to be told. I mean, I was surprised that the New York Times went as far as it did. They don't have to be told that. They know that's the line of the New York Times. I'm surprised because journalists engage in self-censorship. They know what story to write, how to write the story, how to present the story to the audience. And when they go live and talk about it, they know how to do that. They know how to do that. So when I read the Intercept story, I was surprised because you don't have to tell them. And I have attended lectures in the US, in Washington, D.C., in fact, by former New York Times journalists who said they knew what the position of the editor was and the editorial staff that makes the final decision for the cut to go forward with the publication. They knew it. Those who violated were either edited, or if they kept doing it, they were fired. So they have no illusions. I want to make sure people understand. Journalists in the business have no illusions about what's going on. And self-censorship is the biggest driver. Journalists don't have to be hit with a hammer over the head. Do this, do that. They don't, that's not the way it works. They know exactly how to present the story, how to articulate it, what to leave out, what to put in, go forward, because they know the policy organization. It's not, all you have to do is read it or listen to CNN, and you know what CNN is all about, or Fox News or BBC. Hey, people, you know, it's so the idea of democracy, freedom, objectivity is absurd. There is none of that. And one of the reasons that worldwide, especially in the global south, but even in the Western world, people they realize, they see technology has revolutionized the business of journalism because we have instant communication. We instantly know what's going on. We see the images. When you see a Palestinian woman holding a baby and it's dead, and someone has chosen, presumably obviously from the other side, to shoot the baby, and when they have the videotape, they have the photograph, they have the videotape, and they still refuse to use the term war crime, what are people supposed to assume? You see what I'm saying? In other words, you really have to stretch the credulity, the imagination, the sense of disbelief on the part of people, and you have to assume they're all sheep, that the shepherd is guiding somehow, and that's not the way. There are a lot of people, they're not blind, and eventually, by the way, even those who may have doubts and are on the fence, they see that there is a pattern. And the pattern, and this has been going on for 7 months. This is not yesterday. This has been going on for a long time. A long, long time. And people see that there is a pattern here. And the pattern is that the Israeli armed forces are killing Palestinian civilians. And not just in Gaza, by the way. They're also hitting West Bank. And this is the time, I just read recently a report, this is the time, these last 7 months, settlers have seized, with Israeli government approval, over 7,000 acres of Palestinian land. And on top of that, you have the prime minister announcing plans, and this was telegraphed even before the prime minister announced it, about a major multi-billion-dollar investment for development in Gaza. And then I had to research that, and I found out that in 2016, the Israeli government actually had made a proposal, and they had even invited Saudi investors back then in 2016 to build an artificial island, put luxury hotels, a casino, luxury apartments, a marina, right off the coast of Gaza, and make a lot of money. And this was, in fact, the same price tag as the recent announcement, namely $5 billion investment. Now, if you put that together with the offshore gas exploration scheme, and then you have to scratch your head and say, okay, there's something going on here. What are they doing? They want all the Palestinians out of Gaza, as many out as possible. You have former President Trump's son-in-law talking about real estate development of luxury condos along the coast there, seafront luxury condos. And when you have the financial incentives, and then this is not frontline news. This should be frontline news. This is important. Killing thousands of people, uprooting 3 million people over a few $billion. This is very, very important. This is why a company like Google, has had problems with its own employees. Google employees, by the way, have been objecting to Google, as well as another US-based company, namely Amazon, investing in Israel in artificial intelligence. So what we have here is corporate support and the media knowing that this is the position of the corporate world in the West, and knowing that what the position of the government in the West is. So what do? They try to frame everything in order to support what is, by the view of the International Court of Justice, as well as governments, most of the governments around the world, a genocide in Gaza. So this is a very important issue here. And the media is presenting it in the most sugar-coated terms there is. So I'm going to go back to this point. I think this tripod, this three-pillar support behind Israel, what Israel is doing, has been doing in the last 7 months, is key. It's not just the government, it's not just the US government, the German government, UK and France, and to a lesser degree, their junior partners, sending military aid, which enables Israel to carry out genocide. It's not just that. Israel's economy all along has to be sustained somehow. And it's sustained because the Western corporate world is involved. Now, this doesn't let off the hook the Arab countries, which have been trading fully with Israel, as has Turkey, by the way. And recently, although I was convinced, because I read no Islamic country will stand in the way of Iran retaliating for the hit in Damascus, Syria. And then the day after all of this was over, I find out that Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia were all involved in allowing for the interception of those drones. And there are stories that the US used those countries because there were lofty claims by Arab countries. Oh, we're not going to give you access. We're staying out of this. This is none of our business. And then, of course, the King of Jordan came out and tried to justify it. We don't try to argue that the security of his people was at stake, and so forth. So this is a serious issue. It's not just the Western governments and Western economies that have been supporting, enabling Israel. It's also a number of Islamic countries. Obviously, Iran is not one of them, but a number of Islamic countries, and neither is Yemen for that matter. But the vast majority have not interrupted trade. Rhetorically, they're with the Palestinian people. They're against Israel. But that's just the rhetoric. In practice, where it counts, they're not with the Palestinian people. They're with Israel and the United States. Okay. Any observations? Hassan? Okay. Well, I'm going to make a couple of final points, and which are very important, and then I will end it there. I think that when I look at the last 7 months, what I see is a situation of Israel representing the culmination in 2023, 2024 of some early signs of Western decline. When I look at the situation today and the last 7 months, I'm reminded of the German philosopher's very important work when World War I ended in 2008, in 1918. Oswald Spengler wrote a book called The Decline of the West. Spengler's book, The Decline of the West, was about the end of Europe and the European order and the end of the Enlightenment foundation of the European order. And in fact, worse was to come after Spengler wrote that book, because in the interwar period, there was a Great Depression, and then the Third Reich in Spengler's country, in Germany, and fascist Italy, of course, and there were dictatorships all over Europe, in Southern Europe and in Eastern Europe. So Spengler was correct that, in fact, there was the crumbling of the West. He was talking about, of course, Europe. Today, when we look at what is happening in Israel, it's not just the decline of governments behind Israel committing genocide, because I don't know what other term. How can one sugarcoat what's going on in Gaza? How can one possibly sugarcoat what's going on in Gaza? It's just beyond me. But this is an institutional decline. This is a larger decline. And the media has a role in this. The media losing credibility in what has happened in the last 7 months, as well as the corporate sector, when companies, employees like Google, are objecting to their company in investing and enabling Israel with artificial intelligence used to target Palestinians and to pursue ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank. That is part of a wider problem. It's not just government allocating public funds for defense aid to Israel. It's a larger problem. The odd thing of this problem is that the West, as well as Israel, claim that they are the civilized ones and that the rest are uncivilized, implying the rest are uncivilized. They're not democratic. At the United Nations, the representative of Israel spoke of Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East. There is no other democracy, just Israel. Well, the only democracy in the Middle East is committing genocide, not just because I say so, but because the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, as well as countless organizations and governments say so. And this is the reality. So what I see today is the decline of Western civilization, and the militarization phase of this decline is the military solution phase of this decline, the forever war doctrine taking place simultaneously too with Ukraine. Ukraine, a conventional war, Israel, a genocidal war. This is indeed an institutional crisis of the West, when there is lack of imagination to resolve conflict through diplomacy and to sink the rest of the world into this chaos and destabilization. No one can claim that this is in the pursuit of freedom or democracy or national sovereignty or self-defense. No one can claim that. The people involved in this war, the aggressors involved in this war, are not interested in democracy. They're not interested in freedom. They're not interested in anything but raw power for their governments and profit. Profit and power is the only motive. And those two are intertwined. And the media is there to buttress those, to make sure that this goes smoothly. Well, that's all I have for today. We'll continue with another session next time. Thank you for listening. Thank you.